Hello, my name is Dan O'Donnell of the Ireland-Canada Business Association. Today I am delighted to be joined by the Ambassador of Ireland to Canada, Jim Kelly. Ambassador, you've been a great friend and supporter of the ICBA over the years, and we thank you for that. Maybe to start off, I might ask you to tell me a little bit about your career and background to date.
Well, thank you, Dan. It's great to be with you today. So I joined the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade more than 26 years ago now, and I've served in a variety of assignments at home and abroad during that period. I'll spare you the full litany, but I have served in 4 postings abroad at this point. Obviously, my current role as Ireland's ambassador to Canada, previously as our deputy ambassador to the United Nations in New York, and before that I served also at our mission to the European Union in Brussels and at our embassy in Copenhagen back in the mid-90s.
And from those experiences and your current posting, what similarities or differences have you seen?
Well, one of the interesting things about this career is that every job is different, home or abroad. You're dealing with different areas of policy, different types of focus, if you like. So I suppose for me, what's different about Canada is as much in taking the ambassador role, the head of mission role, where you have a responsibility for sort of setting the direction of what the mission does and how we set about delivering on our priorities and on the government's priorities for the Ireland-Canada relationship. Each of the other roles would have been different from that. In New York, for example, and in Brussels as well, very particularly focused on multilateral negotiations on a whole range of very important policy areas. And then in Copenhagen, where I served on my first posting, I would have been quite a junior officer and dealing with a fairly wide set of responsibilities there as well, but covering cultural relations with Denmark, also administrative and management of the embassy, and consular issues as well. So pretty rich and varied experience, I think.
And since you have taken up your posting, we have seen the relationship between Ireland and Canada continue to grow. What do you think have been the key drivers of that growth?
Yeah, well, I think there are probably a number of things. I mean, we are fortunate in the Ireland-Canada relationship to have a relationship that has a very strong historic foundation to it. And it was really a case of trying to frame a dynamic contemporary relationship building on those roots. So we focused indeed on a whole range of areas, on trade and economic, investment, tourism, on the cultural relationship, and on the political relationship, which had perhaps been a little bit moribund over the previous decade. So we've tried to, if you like, to raise the level of our engagement in all of those areas. And in terms of drivers then, I suppose we've had one particularly positive driver in this regard has been the new EU-Canada CETA trade agreement, which has encouraged business in both Ireland and Canada to look at the new opportunities to trade together.
So CETA is a priority for the ICBA. Where do you see it in terms of priorities for the Irish government?
Well, it's very much a priority, a political priority for the Irish government as well as a business priority, I would say. And, you know, Ireland has been one of the strongest backers of CETA from the moment of, if you like, the very beginning of the negotiations all those years ago, almost 10 years ago now, I suppose. So there's no question about that. The question of whether ratification will take place before an election, I think, is a more difficult one. We're now, I think, as anyone who's following the evolving political stories here can see, certainly moving into a pre-election period for a minority government. And obviously it gets a little bit more difficult to predict what will happen legislatively. And it may well be that this is something that will return for the next government, whenever that is, rather than be put through at the end. And that's certainly how it appears. But I've no doubt of the strength of the political commitment that is there to the CETA agreement. And indeed, you know, the evidence of the benefits of CETA is there to be seen in the rapid increase in exports that has followed Irish exports to Canada that has followed the provisional implementation of the agreement.
Well, as I say, our members would be very supportive of seeing that come to pass, and we would see the benefits of that when it comes. You touch on there that we're probably moving into new governments. How do you see the relationship changing with Canada? Have recently formed their new government, and Ireland, an election imminently coming down the line?
Yeah, I don't think there will be much substantive change. I mean, Canada and Ireland, at political level and indeed in the wider public, share a set of values, if you like. We believe in openness. We both have economies that are open to the world. We're pro-international trade. We're multilateralists, open to new talent. And that's something that goes, pretty strongly across the political spectrum in both countries. So I don't think if there are changes and if there's a change in government, there hasn't been a change of government in Canada, although obviously a change from a majority Liberal government to a minority one. But I don't expect we'll see any major shifts, if you like, in what that means for the relationship. We've had a very positive relationship, but very strong political engagement in the last few years. And I'm very hopeful that that will continue in all political circumstances.
Okay, great. As we touch on that, since you've taken up posting, we have seen a significant increase in number of government representatives going two ways.
Yeah.
Do you see that opportunities maybe whereby we will see more Canadian ministers visit Ireland?
Well, I certainly hope that will be the case. I mean, one of my priorities when I was posted initially to Ottawa was to increase that level of political engagement. And we've seen 20 members of the Irish government visit Canada in the past 2.5 years, which is unprecedented in terms of the level of concentration. And that reflects the opportunity that the Irish government sees in the relationship and to grow that relationship across all areas. In terms of what happens in the other direction, we have seen some traffic from Canada too. Prime Minister Trudeau, of course, was here 2 years ago. Minister McKenna, Minister O'Regan have been here, and there have been various parliamentary visits. And we would obviously like to see much more of that reflecting the opportunities. One of the constraints on that, I guess, is that with the new government in Canada in a minority position, it may be that in terms of parliamentary arithmetic, it mightn't be possible to do as much travel as the government would like at any given moment. But we're hopeful that that won't act as too tight a constraint on that.
And I suppose over the past few years, we have seen a lot of support from the Irish government and investment into Canada, with IDA recently announcing, 12 months ago, announcing the opening of a new office. And we've also seen the consular expand their footprint in Canada. Has that created added responsibilities and greater opportunities for Ireland?
Yes, I think it's created both of those, and it's not happening by accident. The government has committed itself under the Global Ireland 2025 plan to double our impact abroad internationally, and that comes from a strong sense that we live in a world not only of interdependency but also a world of a rather turbulent international environment, both in political and a trade sense, and we need to be able to punch at and above our weight as a small open economy and as a multilateral country who has a very strong interest, not only from a principled perspective but also in terms of the country's own prosperity and future well-being in a strong rules-based multilateral order. And you've got to put your money where your mouth is, and that's what the government is doing in Canada and abroad elsewhere too.
Well, as the ICBA, we are very much supportive of continued investment, and we have seen firsthand a growth in our membership as more Canadian companies have looked to set up operations in Ireland. Touching on that and some of the themes of the day, we're acutely aware of the downsides of Brexit, and given your experience and history of writing Ireland's pre-preparation Brexit paper, sitting in Canada, can you see any opportunities for Ireland if Brexit does come to pass?
Yeah, well, I think what I always say really when in reflecting on that issue is that it is important always to be aware that in the overall context, Brexit is a net negative, and there's no getting away from that. And, living here at home here in Dublin, you see the implications for us in terms of trade, east-west trade with the UK, and also, of course, the whole border issue. Now, we're in a slightly better place than we were with regard to that last point, now that the withdrawal agreement has gone through, and we know that there will be no border on the island. It remains to be seen what the future relationship will be and what the costs will be for us. But in terms of opportunities, yes, there are some within that, and particularly in the context of the Canada-Ireland relationship. Ireland will now be the only English-speaking member state in the European Union, in the European single market, in the Eurozone. And that undoubtedly increases our attractiveness to Canadian business and Canadian investment that either wants to remain, that's already based inside the single market and wants to remain there at a time when the UK is leaving, or other companies that are looking to get a foothold in the single market. And I think for Canadian companies, we really have a particularly strong offer, not only in terms of having a very business-friendly environment, a very highly educated workforce, an agile university sector that responds to business. In the case of Canada, you can also add to those things that we share, common law base with most of Canada, and that's obviously a very important point for businesses trying to establish themselves, and also a real cultural compatibility, I think, because of those strong historic links and familiarity that there are between us both.
And I suppose expanding on that a little bit, from you with your travels across Canada, what are companies saying to you? What are Canadian companies saying to you? And also Irish companies who are exporting to Canada, what are they telling you about trade relations?
Well, I think we have these anecdotal experiences, and I'll talk about that. But I think it's important to note that in an overall context, we're seeing on the ground, in actual factual terms, a really substantive rise in the level of trade between Ireland and Canada, and particularly the volume of exports from Ireland to Canada in response to CETA. In the first year of its operation, even provisionally, and it's operating, 99% of the agreement is already in force, we saw more than a 30% rise in the value of goods trade between Ireland and Canada. So we're seeing the outworking of this on the ground. What's interesting, I think, in addition to the big players, is that what CETA offers allows smaller Irish companies for whom the barriers to entry would have been just too high to look at the opportunities that there are in Canada in a way that they mightn't have felt able to do before, and across a whole range of sectors in life sciences, in medtech, in clean tech, in digital health, and so many others. We're seeing those smaller companies as well as larger companies coming into the market and looking at the opportunities and establishing footholds there as well, which is great to see.
And if you'd one piece of advice for an Irish company looking to begin exporting to Canada, what would that be?
Well, it would be to talk to Enterprise Ireland, to be perfectly honest, to do your homework. And this is something our Enterprise Ireland colleagues who do a wonderful job on the ground in Canada always stress. It is a different market. There are differences, notwithstanding the strong similarities. There are always differences between doing business in two different countries. And what they always say is to do your planning, do your homework, understand the market before you commit yourself. And that's what they're there to do, both here and in Canada, is to assist companies with their efforts and their efforts to enter a market and exploring the opportunities that are there.
Okay. And maybe changing direction a little bit onto some topical themes of the day. Climate change is becoming an ever-increasing topic for our members. Do you think, are there opportunities for Canada or Ireland to take leadership positions, maybe in specific areas, on a global stage?
Well, I suppose it exists at two different levels. In terms of the work of governments at international level, there's very close relations between Ireland and Canada in working on climate action issues, which are very important to us both. They're political priorities for both our governments, and as you can see, strong public priorities as well, increasingly moving up the scale as an issue of priority to the wider public too. We've actually had visits in successive years from our climate action ministers, Denis Naughton initially, and then Richard Bruton, to meet with their opposite number, Catherine McKenna, as it was, Minister Catherine McKenna, in both the years they came out. And, you can see when you attend those meetings that there's much learning to be done between two countries like ours that are grappling with the reality of climate change and with trying to address the challenge of reducing emissions, which is a very significant challenge, and it's proven both in Ireland and in Canada in different ways to be a very tough political challenge that's going to be one that will take a lot of hard work and cooperation and indeed quite a long time to resolve and address.
Okay. And maybe just, I suppose, coming back to culture and communities, as you've travelled across Canada, have you seen quite a lot of similarities culturally between the Canadians and the Irish?
Well, of course, one of the key facts that sort of binds us together, if you like, is that 1 in 7 Canadians claim Irish heritage. It's an astonishingly high figure, higher than the 1 in 10 even in the United States. So on a per capita basis, actually a larger Irish diaspora. And what I found interesting in my work and as I travel across Canada to meet people is that it's not quite as concentrated as in the US, so you will meet Irish people everywhere in Canada, and it's one of the really nice things about the job. I have met Irish people in the Yukon, I have met them in the Northwest Territory, as well as in the more obvious locations of, say, Toronto, Montreal, up on the Atlantic coast, and then out in British Columbia as well. So that, if you like, that shared historical experience that came from successive waves of immigration of Irish people there binds Canada and Ireland together very strongly, I think.
And how important is as we've seen more tourism come back and forth between the two nations, how important is direct access flight and the continuing investment by airlines into direct access flights?
Hugely important. And I would say not only for tourism, where it obviously has made an enormous difference, but for business more broadly as well. I mean, the reality of our geographical situation is that without those direct flights, it's not possible to have the kind of growth we've had both in trade flows, investment flows, and in tourism. And this tourism story is really quite extraordinary. And I know, talking to the head of Tourism Ireland on Monday just about it, that how far tourism figures have come, figures from Canada to Ireland in a space of 5 or 6 years. Canada has gone from being perhaps just about in the top 20, I'm not entirely certain, but certainly not in the top 10 or 12 in terms of revenue from tourism for Irish tourism here, to being the number 5 market for tourists to Ireland in revenue terms, which is really, when you consider some of the other markets that it's competing against, it's really quite extraordinary. And that is a function of the tremendously hard work led by our Tourism Ireland colleagues, but done by Team Ireland in general. And the direct air links are absolutely pivotal to that, as they are to the growth in business.
And can you see further growth in trade, particularly as we look now, as you touched on earlier, with Brexit and the IDA opening up new offices? Can you see further growth from Canadian companies looking to use Ireland as their base for Europe?
Yeah, we're already seeing it, and you will have seen it to some extent here, of course, in the ICBA, and the growth of the ICBA's membership, which I'm so happy about myself as well, is a reflection not only of the opportunity, but the fact that companies are now availing of those opportunities. The IDA, as you said, are on the ground now in Toronto. EI are now in both Toronto and shortly will be in Montreal as well. And that reflects, if you like, the government level, the state level's view of the opportunities that are there to be pursued as well. All of the major Canadian banks now have a presence in Ireland, and I think we're going to see a lot more of this in the years to come on the back of the drivers of CETA and the Brexit opportunities too.
Yeah, well, I'd like to say on behalf of the ICBA, we are are delighted to see that the Irish government have opened that office, but we would look for them to even make further investments down the line, particularly as we begin to see more Canadian companies come and set up operations.
Yeah, I think, for the agencies, it's obviously a question of choices in terms of markets. I'm very heartened by the fact that they see and believe in the opportunity that's there. The expansion of EI and IDA reflects that. I think this is the first time that IDA have ever had an operation based in Canada. For our part then, on the diplomatic side, we appreciate the importance of the political and diplomatic support to that business effort as well. So we have our new consulate in Vancouver. We'll be opening a new diplomatic consulate in the next couple of years in Toronto as well. So we'll have gone from 1 to 3 missions in Canada. So that, as I say, it's part of the overall Global Ireland effort, but it also reflects the specific opportunity in the Ireland-Canada relationship, and how that's perceived at government level.
Well, look, as we begin to wrap up, let me ask my final question. If you had one wish from the Irish government, what would it be?
I have to be careful who's watching this now, don't I, Dan? No, I suppose what I would like to see, I mean, when I went out there, I went with a kind of a personal vision, if you like, of what could be done to strengthen the relationship. I've been very fortunate to work with so many stakeholders inside and out of government, including, of course, yourselves here at the ICBA, and it's been a huge team effort. But the vision that I had, certainly on the political and diplomatic side, involved those 3 missions. I would like to see the Toronto mission, which can then work with Enterprise Ireland and Tourism Ireland and the other Irish organisations in the city, which is of course the commercial capital of Canada. I would like to see that on the ground as soon as possible as part of that expansion, and then I feel we'll be really able to leverage the opportunity to the absolute maximum.
Well, Ambassador, thank you very much for your time today, and thank you again for your continued support to the association and helping us achieve our ambitions to grow. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure, and thanks to you and all the colleagues in the ICBA, and keep up the good work, and best of wishes for 2020.
Thank you.